Welcome to Conversations with the Smith Family. I'm Doug Taylor, the CEO of the Smith Family. In this series, we're exploring the big issues affecting young people, their education and their future, and how we can break down barriers to help all young people thrive at school and beyond. Today, I'm speaking with Leslie Loble, a leader in public policy and education reform, who has had an incredibly accomplished career in Australia and in the US. After 2 decades as Deputy Secretary of the New South Wales Department of Education, she is currently Industry Professor at the University of Technology Sydney's Centre for Social Justice and Inclusion, and is also a Paul Ramsay Foundation Fellow and chairs the Australian Network for Quality Digital Education. Her most recent work has focused on AI and education technology, both the risks but also the potential benefits. And so in our conversation today, we'll be talking about how these technologies are changing education, what it means for students in today's classroom, and particularly those young people who experience disadvantage. Welcome, Leslie. As an education children's charity, we like to ask our guests, what's their most memorable education moment? If you can kind of reduce it to one that stands out to you at the very least.
Well, Doug, it's great to be here, and it is impossible to reduce it to one, but I'll give it a good shot. Back in my high school days, I had Mrs. Roth as a teacher. This was in the States. You can hear from the accent. I'm not a local. Despite 27 years here, I haven't gotten rid of the accent. But Mrs. Roth was my history teacher. And it was really a pivotal year for me. She had extraordinarily high expectations, but brought just exceptional teaching to embedding ancient history, really, in the class, and was determined to give us a wide world view. We learned about many of the world's religions, but I think what was so powerful is how she linked that then to contemporary life and contemporary issues. And I suppose in a way I could say she started a much more conscious effort on my part to critically think about things.
And no doubt too, well, I don't want to assume this is the case, but perhaps also an interest in public policy as well, given where you've landed from those early origins.
Yes, well, I shouldn't give away my age, but yep, definitely there was a lot of public policy swirling around me at that time in the US, and that's right. She certainly, as I said, connected much of the ancient world to what we needed to think about in the then contemporary world.
Yeah, fantastic, Leslie. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Like you, we at the Smith Family are really interested in the forces that are shaping education and young people's opportunity to make the most of their education. Now, particularly thinking about education technology and AI, you've built up some expertise over the years in those areas. For our kind of listeners, we have many different listeners with different backgrounds. Could you just share with us, in summary, what those things are and how they're shaping education today into the future, and how significant really are those forces?
Well, AI, firstly, it's been around a very long time. 70 years we've had AI. But what changed was in late 2022 when ChatGPT and generative AI, just hit all of us, and it became the fastest uptake of any app to that point in our history. And it sometimes seems incredibly magical. And it's taken AI into an absolutely new world. When it comes to education, AI is used in sort of a pure ChatGPT way, but increasingly it's the engine that's powering a lot of applications that we use in the classroom. And as AI becomes a universal technology, and it will become as universal as electricity, the real question that then surrounds it is are we shaping it? Is it a technology that will be useful? Is it serving the purposes we want? And that's true in education very much so. So education technology is more and more that intermediary layer between curriculum as written and what gets taught in a classroom. And where once we had textbooks that did that, we now have artificial intelligence powering a lot of these applications. Huge upsides potentially to this: support for teachers, lesson plans, administrative support for students, learning gains, adaptive tutoring, much more personalization, and masses of data that can be feedback that can help with adapting what's happening in a classroom to better suit a wide range of students. But it's not a magic bullet, as you know, and that's where we really have to think about, what do we want out of this technology? It's got to be education first and technology second.
Thanks, Leslie. Great summary on a very kind of complex and dynamic factor at work in education today. At the Smith family, we're particularly keen in how we get better educational outcomes for young people who experience disadvantage. And you've written about how important it is to think about AI and EdTech in terms of being well governed, well designed, and well used. I'm wondering if you could just paint a picture of the kind of standout examples that you think are incredibly promising with that kind of criteria in mind for young people who experience disadvantage.
Absolutely. And if I can just have a tiny bit of context, when I was working in the education department, back in 2016, I started to look at AI. Now, this was before generative AI really hit the scene. And I was really very focused on what it is mean for curriculum and teaching and learning. When I left the department and Paul Ramsey Foundation gave me a fellowship and I joined with UTS, I really wanted to look at this question from a different point of view, which was we were seeing how AI was just revolutionizing healthcare. Much better diagnosis, incredibly new treatments. And I wanted to explore the question of why we weren't seeing this in education, and possibly because it doesn't work, was really where I started. But the evidence brought me to the place where, and that evidence is strengthening, that these AI tools can have an increasingly positive impact, and particularly for students who are struggling, who are at risk or already are behind. And with those very important caveats that you started. But let me give you some examples. One is, for example, a study that was done in the US, a quite large randomized control trial, sort of highest gold standard of evidence, in disadvantaged schools in Chicago and New York. And it combined small group tutoring with a maths application. And that delivered up to 2 years maths gain for students who were really far behind, and at a fraction of the cost. So they were able to scale it up and reach many more disadvantaged students. The important thing was it did bring the human component to it as well, but it highlighted how a technological application could really advance things. Another example, perhaps a bit closer to home, is the Australian Literacy Numeracy Foundation has developed an application that's designed to both help preserve first languages, but also focuses on early learning. And it has AI in the background, but this has enabled it to now operate simultaneously in 17 first languages and English. And particularly powerful and exciting to see how that works with early language acquisition, phonics, literacy, etc. And the last example I'll just give is there are a number of specialist applications that target some of the most common cognitive disabilities in learning. And too often students have to wait a very long time to get a diagnosis, and they have to spend a lot of money to get it. And now, for a fraction of the cost and in a fraction of the time, there not only can be diagnosis, but treatment.
Very compelling examples. And if I think about each of those, they're so relevant to our work and the students that we're supporting, scaling up personalised tutoring when there are kind of workforce constraints at the moment and reaching the numbers of students that we need to really bridge the learning gap, supporting First Nations young people, particularly with the closing the gap challenge that we have. And as you've landed there with a focus on young people with a disability, just getting that early intervention right, again at scale, is the kind of challenge. So really compelling examples. Leslie, thinking about the risks then, so obviously there's enormous opportunities we need to optimise and realise, but thinking about the downside risks, what are the ones that are most at the forefront of your mind as you look at the kind of scan of opportunities and the risks that we need to be really mindful about managing carefully?
Great question, and glad you asked it. Look, public discussion around AI is very, very focused on privacy and safety, and that's incredibly important. We need to have a broader conversation, though, because there are a lot more risks that have to be actively considered and mitigated. And in education, educational equity, has been a big focus of my work, and we need to be paying a lot more attention to it. So let me explain a bit what I mean by educational equity. There's a number of drivers that sit behind that. So first and foremost is the digital divide of access and affordability. It is really disappointing and concerning that in this day and age we still have it. It's getting better in Australia, but we have not gotten rid of it. And COVID just highlighted how bad it was, and the work of you and the Smith family has just highlighted how bad it is. So we're amongst the worst in the OECD for a digital divide, and 8 in 10 students who didn't have effective digital access have trouble completing their homework. So it has a real and immediate effect on learning. That's the bottom line. But as well, we need to think about the design of these tools. A lot of AI is based on assumptions and market incentives that will drive towards certain students in the educational context and certain schools. And we are at risk of leaving disadvantaged schools and students behind. And already we see better off households and schools able to take the best tools and use them very effectively. Use is another equitable divide. We need to have the most effective use of it, and we need skilled teachers, confident teachers, and students as well. And I'd say that's the other piece of it to emphasize, which is the human capability has to be emphasized and developed. Everything from knowing how to effectively prompt these tools to being able to interpret these tools, because there's a lot of they are not perfect tools, and we need to understand that the information we get from them may or may not be accurate, let alone useful. So a range of skills, big upside, but we've got to take these risks seriously and move beyond just privacy.
Yeah, thank you. Which is where a lot of the conversation has been. So it's great that you've brought in the equity dimension to this. I know that's important to you and to your research and the network that you're supporting and leading. And as you've said, it's really important to us at the Smith family. 30% of our students don't have a digitally connected laptop at home, and you've made a direct relationship of that to their educational outcomes or the challenges in realising those. Now, as well as being someone who's become something of a technologist over time, you may not like that label, but you've got enormous expertise. You've also been an education leader and continue to be. Can you just kind of crystal ball for us, Leslie? And I don't want to get all doom and gloom, but if we don't particularly get the equity dimension to this right, what do you foresee as the challenges for us as a nation down the track?
The biggest thing we need to focus on, as I mentioned already, is that our priorities for education need to shape what we expect out of this technology, what we'll invest in for this technology, and what we'll use for the technology. And that's, at the moment, I worry that the technology, we're at the whip end, not having the whip hand on technology. AI is not all doom and gloom. I outlined some of the positive sides, and we can see in other dimensions of our lives where it's having a positive impact. So I'm optimistic that we will be able to shape the technology, and that we will be able to ensure that we have the kind of access that's expected. You know, you've been very active in leading the way in a conversation in Australia about greater investment in education. I was certainly involved for a very long time. I know you talked to my friend David Gonski, with whom I worked back in Gonski 1, so going back quite a ways. That's possibly the most important thing we could do, is really make sure we have a strong education system and invest in areas of disadvantage. A strong foundation of literacy and numeracy, coupled with a real focus on thinking skills, critical thinking, creative thinking, and ethical reasoning. We need to see them as really the super skills for navigating through a technological future, an economic future, an environmental one that's changing around us and where we don't know where it's going. But the most important thing, despite the fact that I think about technology, the most important thing is high quality education, universally accessed and available.
Yes, it's really the bedrock, isn't it? It continues to be one of those foundations of a functioning and inclusive and thriving society. So important that we don't lose sight of a great education system. And yes, you're right to draw out the kind of access dimensions to this conversation, but equally important, as you're saying, are those skills that need to be built for the future. And one of the things that's concerned us, and I'm sure it concerns you, is we actually have a declining rate of ICT proficiency when you look at NAPLAN data, which is of great concern and a bit paradoxical, but really underscores how important this whole agenda is. So with that in mind, Leslie, and thinking about your kind of background in policy as well, what sort of policy reform do you think would really enable this agenda to be sustainable, balancing the risks and the opportunities now and into the future?
Well, on that bedrock of top-notch education, which we need to keep pushing for, when it comes to education technology, what I think we could do is, and I think it's very achievable, is enact a digital equity learning guarantee, which would essentially say, from governments to parents, families, students, teachers, schools, and the community at large, that we recognize just how powerful these technologies are, how potentially positive they can be, and how we need to address the full range of risks around them. And especially when it comes to equity, it is that guarantee can tackle the main drivers, which I listed before: the access and affordability, the quality design through a strong set of standards that says this is what we expect for what technology is going to be in the classroom with our children. That's not beyond our capability at all to say this is what we expect, both in terms of privacy and security, but also in terms of educational quality. And investing in the skills and capabilities. I don't think we need to, look, coding was something we once said, if we taught kids coding, that's how they would navigate ICT. But now AI can code, and can code quite effectively. What we really need is these technologies to be serving our collective best interests and priorities. And that's why, as boring as it might sound, I actually think investing in things like AI literacy, critical evaluation of the information we're getting, understanding how to use these tools in work. Can I give you an example? I heard from a major law firm recently has invested, as law firms do, in AI-based applications that give them judicial precedents and case law and the like. And again, once that was all paper-based, then it became digitized, then it became generative AI. There was a Harvard study that showed up to a third of using those products, up to a third of the time, you can get a hallucination, a complete hallucination, a case that didn't exist,
Right.
a judicial reasoning that doesn't exist, a range of things. So what this law firm has found, they started out saying, oh, we have to teach you about the technology. And really what they found was that they have to say, you have to bring your knowledge and skill and critical lens to this.
Yeah.
That's what this digital equity learning guarantee has to ensure ultimately, that's what we're doing here.
Yeah. Great analysis and summary, Leslie. And almost takes us back to where we started with your teacher and that experience of good critical thinking and looking at ancient history and applying that to how you solve problems in a contextually appropriate way. So it's a nice kind of way to kind of round out our conversation and thinking about the risks and the opportunities. Leslie, look, thank you so much for your leadership in these areas. It's wonderful to have someone with your background in education really shaping the thinking and helping us look at this in a sustainable way for our future. We really appreciate your time and your leadership in an ongoing way. So thank you. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Doug. And we need more of what you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Leslie. And look, thank you for joining us today for Conversations with the Smith Family. If you'd like to know more about the Smith family, go to thesmithfamily.com.au. Thank you.